The frozen wind cut through Victoria's traveling coat like 1,000 knives as she stepped off the train into what she could only describe as hell itself made of ice. She had come from Boston expecting cold, but this Wyoming Territory blizzard of January 1882 was something entirely beyond her imagination. A whiteout so complete she could barely see 3 feet ahead. The station master who had promised to escort her to meet her intended husband was nowhere to be found, and panic rose in her chest as she realized she might actually die here, alone in this God-forsaken place called Leavenworth. She clutched her carpet bag tighter, her fingers already numb despite her gloves. The other passengers had vanished like ghosts into the storm, leaving her standing on the platform with snow piling around her ankles. Victoria's teeth chattered violently as she tried to remember the name of the man she was supposed to marry. Harold something. Harold Morrison, that was it. A rancher who had written surprisingly eloquent letters about his spread outside of town, and his need for a wife to help build a life with him in this harsh territory. She had responded to his advertisement in the Boston Herald 6 months ago when her circumstances had become desperate after her father's death left her penniless and at the mercy of creditors. Miss, are you the bride from Boston?" A voice cut through the howling wind, deep and urgent. Victoria turned to see a figure approaching through the snow, tall and broad-shouldered, his face mostly hidden by a heavy scarf and wide-brimmed hat crusted with ice. She could only make out his eyes, a striking shade of blue-gray that seemed almost luminous against the white backdrop. "Yes, I am Victoria Chambers. I am looking for Harold Morrison or someone to take me to him," she called back, her voice barely audible over the storm. The man reached her in 3 long strides and immediately began ushering her toward the edge of the platform. "Madam, I am Brett Jenkins. I work the neighboring ranch to Morrison's place. I was in town for supplies when the storm hit. Morrison sent word yesterday that his bride was coming, but there is no way anyone is making it out of town tonight. This blizzard is the worst I have seen in 5 years. We need to get you somewhere warm before you freeze to death right here." "But I should wait for Mr. Morrison," Victoria protested, even as her body betrayed her by swaying slightly from the cold. Brett caught her elbow, steadying her with a firm but gentle grip. "Madam, Morrison is not coming. No one with any sense is out in this weather. The town doctor lives 2 buildings down and he has a spare room. Come on now, we need to move." Victoria wanted to argue further, but another gust of wind nearly knocked her off her feet. Brett's arm went around her shoulders, anchoring her, and he half carried, half dragged her off the platform. She lost all sense of direction immediately, able only to put one foot in front of the other and trust this stranger who claimed to know her intended husband. "Wait," she gasped. "My trunk." "It is still at the station. I will get it tomorrow if the storm breaks," Brett shouted near her ear. "Right now, you are what matters." They stumbled forward through drifts that came up to Victoria's knees. Her skirts were soaked through almost instantly, the heavy wool becoming an icy burden. She could not feel her feet anymore. The world had narrowed to just the next step, the warmth of Brett's solid presence beside her, and the desperate hope that shelter was indeed nearby. Just when she thought her legs would give out entirely, Brett pushed open a door and they tumbled into blessed warmth. Victoria collapsed immediately, unable to stand another moment. She was vaguely aware of voices, of Brett speaking urgently to someone, and then hands were helping her up, guiding her toward a fire. "Dear God, she is frozen through," a woman's voice said. "Brett, you got her here just in time. Another few minutes and we would be fighting frostbite." "Is Doc Anderson here?" Brett asked, his voice tight with concern. He is out delivering a baby at the Schneider place. Got there right before the storm hit full force, so he is stuck there until it passes. But I know what to do. Help me get her out of these wet things." Through her haze of cold and exhaustion, Victoria felt mortified as they began removing her coat, her gloves, her boots. But survival instincts overrode modesty, and she let them work. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Anderson, the doctor's wife, wrapped Victoria in thick blankets and sat her directly in front of the fireplace. Brett had moved away to give her privacy, but Victoria could see him across the room, removing his own snow-covered coat and hat. For the first time, she got a proper look at him. He was perhaps 28 or 30, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar, strong features weathered by sun and wind, and those remarkable eyes that seemed to assess everything with sharp intelligence. He was handsome in a rugged, unpolished way that was entirely different from the gentleman she had known in Boston. "Thank you," Victoria managed to say through still chattering teeth. "You saved my life." Brett turned to look at her, and something in his expression softened. "Just happened to be in the right place. Anyone would have done the same. But you did do it," Victoria insisted, "and I am grateful." Mrs. Anderson brought hot tea, pressing the cup into Victoria's hands and helping her drink. The warmth spread through her chest like liquid sunshine. Slowly, painfully, feeling began returning to her extremities, accompanied by a burning sensation that made her gasp. "That is good," Mrs. Anderson assured her. "Means you are warming up properly. No frostbite, I think, though your toes and fingers will hurt for a while." Brett settled into a chair across the room, his long legs stretched out before him, watching Victoria with an intensity that made her self-conscious. "So you are Morrison's mail-order bride," he said, not unkindly. "That is a long way to come from Boston to Wyoming territory." "I had little choice," Victoria replied, surprised at her own honesty. Perhaps it was the near-death experience or the strange intimacy of this situation, but she found herself continuing. "My father passed away last spring. He had debts I did not know about. Everything was sold. I had no male relatives to help me, and the options for a 22-year-old woman alone in Boston are limited and largely unpleasant." "That is rough," Brett said quietly. "I am sorry about your father." "Thank you." Victoria sipped more tea, studying him over the rim of her cup. "You said you work the ranch next to Mr. Morrison's. Do you know him well?" Something flickered across Brett's face, too quick for her to read. "Well enough. Known him about 3 years now. He is a hard worker, got a decent spread going." "Is he a good man?" Victoria asked, realizing how desperate that question sounded but needing to know. Brett was silent for a long moment. "He is honest in his business dealings, pays his debts, shows up when he says he will." It was not exactly a ringing endorsement, and Victoria felt a twist of anxiety in her stomach. "But is he kind?" "I cannot speak to that, madam. He keeps to himself mostly." Brett leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "What did he tell you about himself in his letters?" "That he has a 300-acre ranch, cattle and some horses. That he is 35 years old, never married, and looking for a wife to help build a home with him. That he does not drink to excess or gamble. That he believes in fair dealing and hard work." Victoria recited the facts that had seemed so reassuring when she read them in her desperate circumstances in Boston. Now, sitting here in this strange house in the middle of a blizzard, they seemed like very little to base a marriage on. "That is all accurate," Brett confirmed. "Though Morrison is actually closer to 40, I would say." Victoria absorbed this small dishonesty, choosing not to dwell on it. Age gaps were common enough in such arrangements. "And you have a wife, Mr. Jenkins," Brett pleased. "And no wife." "I have a smaller spread than Morrison, about 150 acres. Just me and 2 ranch hands keeping it running. Between the work and the isolation, there has not been much opportunity for courting." He smiled slightly, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer. "Though I have been saving to send for a mail-order bride myself, truth be told, winters here are long and lonely." Mrs. Anderson returned with thick socks and a flannel nightgown. "You should rest, dear. You have been through an ordeal. Brett, you are welcome to sleep on the settee tonight. Nobody is going anywhere in this storm." The blizzard continued to rage outside, the wind howling like a wounded animal. Victoria changed into the borrowed nightgown behind a privacy screen, her body still aching with cold and exhaustion. Mrs. Anderson showed her to a small but comfortable guest room, and Victoria collapsed onto the bed, certain she would fall asleep immediately. Instead, she lay awake, listening to the storm and thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. Tomorrow, or whenever this blizzard ended, she would meet Harold Morrison, the man she had agreed to marry. She would begin her new life as a rancher's wife in Wyoming territory, learning to survive in a place that had nearly killed her within an hour of arrival. It was terrifying and overwhelming, and she found herself thinking not about her mysterious future husband, but about Brett Jenkins, his strong arm around her shoulders, his calm voice guiding her through the storm, his striking eyes watching her with what seemed like genuine concern. Victoria firmly pushed those thoughts away. Brett had simply been a good Samaritan, nothing more. He had a neighboring ranch, which meant she would likely see him occasionally, but her focus needed to be on making her marriage to Harold Morrison work. She had burned her bridges in Boston. There was no going back now. Eventually, exhaustion won and she drifted into uneasy sleep. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and for a disoriented moment, could not remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back, the blizzard, Brett, the fact that she was stranded in Leavenworth instead of meeting her future husband. Pale morning light filtered through the curtains. The wind had died down significantly, though snow still fell steadily. Victoria dressed in her now dry traveling clothes and ventured out to find Mrs. Anderson cooking breakfast while Brett sat at the kitchen table, already looking like he had been up for hours. "Good morning," Victoria said quietly. Brett stood immediately, his manners ingrained despite the frontier setting. "Morning. Storm has let up some. I am planning to head out to Morrison's place once I have eaten. Let him know you are safe and here in town. The roads will be rough, but my horse can manage it. Could I come with you?" Victoria asked. "I mean, if I am to meet him anyway, perhaps it would be better to do it today rather than wait." Brett exchanged a glance with Mrs. Anderson, something unspoken passing between them. "Madam Victoria, I do not think that is wise. It is still dangerous out there, and you just survived a close call with freezing. Better to wait another day, let the weather fully clear." "I have already imposed on the Andersons' hospitality enough," Victoria protested, "and Mr. Morrison is probably worried. He knows the train arrived. He knows you are somewhere in town. He will not be worried, he will be practical about it, knowing nobody could travel in that storm." Brett's tone was gentle but firm. "Please, just wait one more day." Victoria wanted to argue but recognized the sense in his words. She was still exhausted, her body aching from yesterday's ordeal. "All right, if you think that is best." After breakfast, Brett prepared to leave, bundling back into his heavy coat and hat. He paused at the door, looking back at Victoria. "I will be back tomorrow to escort you out to Morrison's place myself. Make sure you get there safe." "You do not have to do that," Victoria said. "You have already done so much." "I want to," Brett replied simply. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, and Victoria felt that flutter in her chest again. the one she absolutely should not be feeling. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him, leaving her with Mrs. Anderson and a long day to think about her future. Mrs. Anderson proved to be pleasant company, a practical woman in her early 50s who had lived in Leavenworth for 15 years. She filled Victoria in on the town's history and its residents while they worked together on various household tasks. Leavenworth had been established in 1874, taking its name from the more famous Fort town in Kansas, and had grown slowly but steadily as a supply point for the surrounding ranches and a few mining operations in the nearby mountains. "It is a hard life here, Mrs. Anderson said honestly as they kneaded bread dough together. "The winters are brutal, the summers are scorching, and everything in between tries to kill you in one way or another. But there is a freedom here too, a chance to build something from nothing. My husband and I came with almost no money, and now he is the only doctor for 50 miles. We matter here in a way we never would have back east." "You know Harold Morrison well?" Victoria asked, unable to help herself. Mrs. Anderson's hands stilled in the dough. "I know him to see him in town. He has never needed my husband's services, so I cannot say I know him personally." "What is his reputation?" The older woman chose her words carefully. "He is not well liked, but neither is he hated. He keeps to himself, pays his bills. Some folks find him cold. Others just think he is shy. I truly cannot tell you what kind of husband he will make, dear." It was more honesty than comfort, but Victoria appreciated it nonetheless. Brett returned late the next morning, leading a gentle mare behind his own horse. The storm had passed, leaving Leavenworth buried under 2 feet of fresh snow that glittered blindingly in the sunshine. Victoria had retrieved her trunk from the station earlier, and now she stood on the Andersons' porch in her warmest traveling outfit, carpetbag in hand, feeling like she was walking toward either her salvation or her doom. "Morrison is expecting you," Brett said, helping her mount the mare. "The road is rough but passable. Stay close to me." They rode out of town slowly, the horses picking their way carefully through the snow. The landscape was breathtaking in its harsh beauty, endless white expanses broken by dark pine forests and distant mountains that seemed to scrape the pale blue sky. Victoria had never seen country so vast and empty. It made her feel simultaneously insignificant and filled with possibility. "What is your ranch like?" Victoria asked after they had been riding for perhaps 20 minutes. Conversation seemed better than silence and her own anxious thoughts. "Small but growing. I have about 40 head of cattle right now, hoping to double that this spring. Got a sturdy cabin, barn, and a good well. My 2 hands, Pete and Joaquin, live in the bunkhouse. It is not fancy, but it is mine." Pride colored Brett's voice. "Came out here 5 years ago with almost nothing. Worked as a ranch hand for 3 years, saved every penny, and finally bought my own land. It has been the hardest thing I have ever done, but also the most satisfying." "Where are you from originally?" Victoria found herself genuinely curious about this man who had entered her life so suddenly. "Indiana, small farming town. I was the youngest of 6 boys, which meant there was no land for me to inherit, had to make my own way." Brett glanced over at her. "What about you? Were you born in Boston?" "Yes, born and raised. My mother died when I was 10, so it was just my father and me for 12 years. He was a banker, respectable and proper. We were not wealthy but comfortable, or so I thought." Victoria's throat tightened with old grief and newer betrayal. "After he died, I learned he had been gambling away money for years, trying to recoup investment losses. Everything was mortgaged, borrowed against, promised to creditors. I had 2 weeks to leave our house." "That must have been terrifying," Brett said quietly. "It was. I stayed with a friend's family for a while, tried to find work as a governess or teacher, but positions are scarce and competition is fierce. Then I saw the advertisements for mail-order brides, and it seemed like the only option that did not involve selling myself in one way or another. Victoria's cheeks heated at her own bluntness, but something about Brett made her want to be honest. I know it sounds dramatic, but it truly felt like choosing between bad options and worse ones. I do not think it sounds dramatic at all, Brett replied. You did what you had to do to survive. That is not shameful. That is strong. They rode in companionable silence for a while longer. Victoria found herself relaxing despite her nerves about meeting Morrison. Brett's presence was calming, solid and reliable in a way she had not experienced with many men. He did not try to fill every silence with meaningless chatter, did not condescend or lecture her. He simply rode beside her, occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning her about difficult terrain. After nearly an hour, Brett pointed to a cluster of buildings in the distance. That is Morrison's place. Victoria's stomach clenched. This was it, the ranch that would be her home, the place where she would spend the rest of her life. It looked substantial enough from a distance. A large house, barn, several outbuildings, corrals. Smoke rose from the chimney, a sign of habitation and warmth. As they drew closer, a man emerged from the house. He was of medium height and build, with sandy hair graying at the temples and a weathered face that could have been anywhere from 35 to 50. His expression was closed, unreadable. Morrison, Brett called out in greeting as they rode up. Brought your bride safe and sound. Harold Morrison's eyes swept over Victoria with cool appraisal like he was evaluating a horse he might purchase. Miss Chambers, welcome to Wyoming territory. His voice was flat, emotionless. No warmth, no relief that she had survived the blizzard, no pleasure at finally meeting her in person. Victoria's heart sank even as she forced a smile. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I apologize for the delay in arriving. The storm made it impossible. Storms happen. Morrison reached up to help her dismount, his hands impersonal and brief on her waist. You look healthy enough. Can you cook and clean? Yes, sir. I managed my father's household for many years. Good, we will marry in town tomorrow if the preacher is available. No point in waiting. Morrison finally looked at Brett. Obliged to you for bringing her out. I will get her trunk later. It was clearly a dismissal. Brett's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. Victoria, if you need anything, my ranch is about 5 miles east. Just follow the main road and take the fork toward the Pine Ridge. Thank you, Brett, for everything. Victoria tried to convey all her gratitude in those simple words, her fear suddenly spiking at the thought of him leaving her here with this cold stranger. Brett seemed to hesitate, his eyes searching her face. For a moment, Victoria thought he might say something else, but then he simply touched the brim of his hat and turned his horse back toward the road. She watched him ride away, feeling absurdly like she was losing her only friend in this vast, empty territory. Come inside, Morrison said, already walking toward the house. I will show you where things are. The house was larger than Victoria expected, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, 2 bedrooms and even a small bathing room, which was a luxury she had not anticipated. Everything was clean but utterly without personality or warmth. No pictures on the walls, no decorative items, no books or personal touches of any kind. It was as sterile as a hotel room. You will sleep in the spare room until we are married, Morrison said, showing her a small bedroom with a narrow bed and simple dresser. After that, you will move into the main bedroom with me. I expect you to handle all cooking, cleaning, laundry, and helping with the chickens. When I need extra hands during calving or roundup, you will help with that too. In return, you will have a roof over your head, food on the table, and my name. That is the arrangement." It sounded more like a business contract than a marriage, but Victoria nodded. "I understand. That seems fair." "I am not a cruel man," Morrison continued, his tone still flat and businesslike. "But I am not a soft one either. I need a wife who can work hard and not complain. If you can do that, we will get along fine. If not, well, there is no going back to Boston now, so you will have to make the best of it." The words were harsh but not untrue. Victoria lifted her chin. "I am not afraid of hard work, Mr. Morrison. I will do my part." "Good." For the first time, something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. "Get yourself settled. Supper is at 6. I have beans and bacon in the pantry." He left her then, heading back outside to whatever ranch work occupied him. Victoria sat on the narrow bed and allowed herself exactly 2 minutes to feel overwhelmed and frightened. Then she stood up, unpacked her few belongings, and went to figure out how to cook a decent meal in this unfamiliar kitchen with limited supplies. That night, she lay awake in the spare room, listening to the sounds of this strange house settling around her. Morrison had eaten her cooking without comment, which she supposed was better than criticism. He had asked her a few questions about her journey and her life in Boston, but did not seem particularly interested in her answers. After supper, he had read his ledgers by lamplight while Victoria cleaned up, and then he had retired to his own room with a curt good night. This would be her husband. This silent, cold man who looked at her like she was hired help rather than a person he might build a life with. Victoria tried to remember Mrs. Anderson's words about the freedom of the West, about building something from nothing. Perhaps in time, Morrison would warm up to her. Perhaps this was just his way, and underneath the icy exterior was a decent man who simply did not know how to express emotion. But as she finally drifted towards sleep, it was not Morrison's face she saw in her mind, but Brett's. Those blue-gray eyes looking at her with concern and something else she could not quite name. The memory of his arm around her shoulders, keeping her safe in the storm. The way he had made her feel seen and valued, even as a stranger. Victoria firmly pushed those thoughts away again. That way lay only trouble and heartbreak. Tomorrow she would marry Harold Morrison, and she would make the best of it because she had no other choice. The wedding took place the following afternoon in Leavenworth's small church, with Mrs. Anderson and the shopkeeper's wife serving as witnesses. Brett was not there, which Victoria told herself was a relief even as she felt disappointed. The ceremony was brief and perfunctory. Morrison placed a thin gold band on her finger. They spoke their vows in flat tones, and suddenly Victoria was a married woman, Mrs. Harold Morrison. They rode back to the ranch in silence. The reality of what would happen that night hung between them, unspoken but inevitable. Victoria's stomach churned with anxiety. She barely knew this man, and now she was expected to share his bed, to submit to intimacies she had only the vaguest understanding of. That evening, after another silent supper, Morrison stood from the table and looked at her directly for the first time all day. "I suppose we should get this part over with. Come to the bedroom." It was possibly the least romantic way he could have phrased it. Victoria followed him on shaking legs, her heart pounding so hard she felt sick. The bedroom was as impersonal as the rest of the house, the large bed dominating the space. Morrison began unbuttoning his shirt, his movements brisk and businesslike. "I assume you know what is expected." "I have a general understanding," Victoria managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. What followed was brief, awkward, and painful. Morrison was not deliberately cruel, but neither was he gentle or patient. He approached the act with the same cold efficiency he seemed to apply to everything else in his life. When it was over, He rolled away from her and was asleep within minutes. Victoria lay awake in the darkness, tears sliding silently down her temples into her hair. This was her life now. This was what she had agreed to. She tried to tell herself it would get better, that it had probably been awkward and uncomfortable for many brides on their wedding night, that familiarity would ease the tension between them. But deep in her heart, she feared this was simply who Harold Morrison was, and no amount of time or familiarity would change that fundamental coldness at his core. The next weeks settled into a grinding routine. Victoria woke at dawn to make breakfast, spent her days cooking, cleaning, tending the chickens, doing laundry, mending clothes, and handling countless other tasks that kept a ranch household running. Morrison spoke to her only when necessary, usually to give instructions or point out something she had done wrong. At night, he used her body with the same mechanical efficiency as that first time, never asking what she felt or needed, never attempting any tenderness or connection. Victoria felt herself becoming hollow, going through the motions of life without really living. She had no friends, no one to talk to. The nearest neighbor was Brett's ranch, but Morrison made it clear he expected her to stay on their property unless he specifically took her to town, which he did only once every 2 weeks for supplies. It was during one of these supply trips, in late February, that Victoria saw Brett again. She was selecting items at the general store while Morrison conducted business at the feed depot. She felt Brett's presence before she saw him, some instinct making her turn toward the door just as he walked in. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Brett's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Victoria, it is good to see you. How are you settling in?" "Well enough," Victoria lied, painfully aware of the shopkeeper nearby who would certainly gossip if she said anything untoward. "The ranch keeps me very busy." Brett's smile faded slightly as he studied her face. She wondered what he saw there, the weight she had lost, the shadows under her eyes from poor sleep, the strain of maintaining a cheerful facade. "Are you eating enough? You look thinner." "I am fine, truly, just adjusting to the hard work." Victoria forced brightness into her voice. "How is your ranch? Did you lose any cattle in the blizzards?" "A few, but not as bad as some." Brett moved closer, lowering his voice. "Victoria, are you truly all right? You seem— There you are." Morrison's voice cut through the store like a blade. "Finished with your shopping?" "Yes, just now." Victoria quickly gathered her basket, not meeting Brett's eyes again. "Jenkins." Morrison's tone was cold. "Surprised to see you in town on a weekday." "Needed some supplies that could not wait," Brett replied evenly, though Victoria could hear the tension in his voice. "I was just saying hello to your wife, making her feel welcome in the community. She has all the welcome she needs from me." Morrison's hand clamped on Victoria's elbow, proprietary and controlling. "We have other stops to make." He steered her toward the counter to pay for their goods, effectively ending the conversation. Victoria risked one glance back at Brett and found him watching her with an expression that mixed concern and frustration. She tried to convey with her eyes that she was all right, that he should not worry, but she was not sure the message was convincing when she did not believe it herself. The ride back to the ranch was tense. Morrison finally spoke when they were halfway home. "I do not want you talking to Jenkins." "He was simply being neighborly," Victoria protested. "I know what he was being." Morrison's jaw was tight. "I have seen the way he looks at you. And the way you look at him." "I am not blind, wife." Victoria's heart raced. "I do not know what you mean. I have barely spoken to the man." "Keep it that way. You are my wife now, my property in the eyes of the law. I expect your loyalty and your obedience. If I find out you have been meeting with Jenkins or any other man, there will be consequences." The threat hung in the air. Victoria wanted to argue, to defend herself against accusations that were not entirely unfair given her thoughts about Brett, but she recognized the danger in pushing Morrison when he was in this mood. "I understand. You have my loyalty." Morrison seemed mollified by her submission. They finished the ride in silence, but the incident had added a new layer of tension to their already strained relationship. That night, Morrison was rougher than usual, and Victoria could not shake the feeling that it was a punishment, a reminder of his ownership over her. March came in like a lion, bringing more snow and bitter cold. Victoria's world narrowed to the confines of the ranch, days blending into an endless cycle of work and loneliness. She found herself thinking about Brett far too often, remembering his kindness, his warm eyes, the way he had made her feel safe and seen. She tried to feel guilty about these thoughts, but mostly she just felt sad for what might have been in a different life. One afternoon in mid-March, while Morrison was out checking his cattle, Victoria heard hoofbeats approaching the house. Her first thought was fear. Morrison discouraged visitors, and unexpected callers could mean trouble. She grabbed the rifle Morrison had taught her to use and went to the door cautiously. It was Brett. He sat his horse in the yard, hands visible and empty, clearly trying not to appear threatening. "Victoria, I am sorry to come unannounced. Is Morrison here? He is out on the range. He should not return for another hour or two." Victoria stepped onto the porch, still holding the rifle though pointed at the ground. "You should not be here. He told me not to speak with you." "I know, and I tried to stay away, I really did." Brett dismounted, his movements slow and deliberate. "But I have been worried sick about you. You did not look well when I saw you in town, and I just needed to know that you are all right." "Why would you care?" Victoria asked, though her heart was beating faster for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "Because I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the day I pulled you out of that blizzard." Brett's words came out in a rush, like he had been holding them back for too long. "I know you are a married woman. I know I have no right to these feelings. But I cannot pretend I do not have them. I am not asking anything of you, Victoria. I just need to know that you are safe and being treated well." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. When was the last time anyone had cared about her well-being? When had anyone asked how she felt or what she needed? "I am not being mistreated, if that is what you mean. He does not beat me or starve me. But you are not happy." It was not a question. Victoria found she could not lie to him. "No, I am not happy. But happiness was not part of the arrangement. I have shelter and food and a respectable position. That is more than many women have." Brett took a step closer, and Victoria should have backed away but found she could not. "You deserve more than that. You deserve to be cherished and cared for. You deserve someone who looks at you like you are a gift, not a burden." "Please," Victoria whispered. "Please do not say things like that. It only makes this harder." "I know. I am sorry." But Brett took another step, and now he was close enough that Victoria could see the gold flecks in his gray-blue eyes. "Tell me you do not feel anything for me, and I will ride away right now. I will never bother you again." Victoria opened her mouth to say exactly that, to lie and protect them both from the dangerous path they were walking. But the words would not come. Instead, she found herself saying, "I cannot tell you that." The air between them seemed to crackle with electricity. Brett reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently cupped her face in his calloused hand. "Then what do we do?" "Nothing." Victoria forced herself to step back, breaking the contact even though every part of her wanted to lean into his touch. "We do nothing. I made vows. I am a married woman. Whatever I feel for you, it does not matter. It cannot matter." "But what kind of life is this for you?" Brett's voice was anguished. "Trapped with a man who does not value you, who treats you like hired help instead of a wife. It is the life I chose, the life I agreed to." Victoria straightened her spine, drawing on reserves of strength she did not know she still possessed. "You need to leave, Brett. If Morrison comes back and finds you here, there will be trouble for both of us. Please, just go." Brett looked like he wanted to argue further, but after a long moment he nodded. "All right. But Victoria, if you ever need anything, if you are ever in danger or need help, my ranch is 5 miles east. You remember, follow the main road forked toward the Pine Ridge." I remember. How could she forget when she had thought about it countless times? Imagining escape routes she would never take, Brett mounted his horse, pausing to look down at her one more time. "I meant what I said. You deserve better than this." Then he was gone, riding away and leaving Victoria standing on the porch with tears streaming down her face. She allowed herself 2 minutes to cry, to feel the weight of her situation and the cruelty of meeting the right man at entirely the wrong time. Then she wiped her eyes, went back inside and started preparing supper as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. Everything had changed. Because now Victoria knew with absolute certainty that Brett Jenkins felt the same impossible feelings she did. And that knowledge was both the most wonderful and most terrible thing she could imagine. Morrison returned home in a good mood, as much as he ever had a good mood, having found all his cattle healthy despite the harsh winter. He actually spoke during supper, telling Victoria about his plans for spring calving and possibly buying additional land from a neighbor who was selling out and moving back east. Victoria listened and responded appropriately, playing the role of dutiful wife while her mind spun with thoughts of Brett. That night, lying beside her sleeping husband, Victoria made a decision. She could not change her situation. She could not undo her marriage or act on her feelings for Brett. But she could stop simply enduring her life and start trying to actually live it. She would find ways to make this ranch feel like home. She would try harder to connect with Morrison, to soften his rough edges, to build some kind of genuine partnership, even if it never became love. She would stop comparing her husband to Brett Jenkins. It was a good plan, a noble plan. Victoria threw herself into it with determination. She made Morrison's favorite foods, kept the house spotless, attempted conversations about his interests and work. She asked his opinion on things and listened attentively to his answers. She tried to be an enthusiastic partner in their bedroom, though Morrison seemed confused by her efforts and never reciprocated with any additional tenderness. For his part, Morrison seemed to appreciate her increased efforts, though he showed it only in small ways. He brought her a length of fabric from town for a new dress. He fixed the loose board on the porch that she had mentioned. He actually smiled once when she made a particularly good pie. It was not much, but it was something. Victoria told herself it was enough. She could build a tolerable life on these small foundations. She did not need passion or romance. She just needed companionship and respect, and perhaps in time she would earn that from her husband. Spring arrived in fits and starts, cold days interspersed with warmer ones that promised the eventual arrival of summer. The ranch came alive with activity. Morrison hired 3 temporary hands for calving season, and Victoria found herself cooking for 5 people instead of 2, keeping the bunkhouse supplied with clean linens, and helping with the orphaned calves that needed bottle feeding. The work was exhausting but also distracting. Victoria fell into bed each night too tired to think, which was a blessing. She had not seen Brett in over a month, though she heard Morrison mention him occasionally in conversations with his ranch hands. Apparently, Brett had lost several head of cattle to a late freeze and was struggling financially. Victoria felt a pang of worry but firmly pushed it aside. Brett's problems were not her concern. She had to focus on her own life. Then in early April, everything changed again. Morrison had taken two of his hands to move cattle to a higher pasture, leaving Victoria alone at the ranch with only one young cowboy, Sam, who was mending fences on the north boundary. Victoria was in the garden, planting the vegetables that would feed them through the summer, when she heard a horse approach at full gallop. She looked up to see Sam racing toward the house, his face pale with panic. "Mrs. Morrison, you need to come quick. It is Mr. Morrison." "There has been an accident." Victoria dropped her trowel and ran toward Sam. "What happened? Where is he?" "About 2 miles out near the rocky ford. His horse spooked at a rattlesnake and threw him. He hit his head on a rock. He is unconscious and bleeding bad." Sam was already turning his horse. "I will ride to town for Doc Anderson. You need to get out there and try to stop the bleeding. Take the wagon and blankets. Follow the creek north." He was gone before Victoria could ask more questions. Her mind raced as she ran to hitch up the wagon, her hands shaking as she threw blankets and clean rags into the back. Morrison was hurt, possibly dying. Despite everything, despite the coldness and distance between them, he was her husband. She had vowed to stand by him in sickness and health. The 2 miles felt like 20. Victoria pushed the horses as fast as she dared over the rough terrain, following the creek just as Sam had instructed. She found Morrison lying on the ground with one of the ranch hands kneeling beside him, pressing a red-soaked bandana against the side of his head. He woke up for a minute but then passed out again, the hand, an older man named Carl, told her. "Breathing is good, but that head wound is bad." Victoria dropped to her knees beside her husband, her nurse's training from helping her ailing father kicking in. The gash on Morrison's temple was deep and bleeding profusely. She pressed clean cloth to it, applying firm pressure. His face was gray, his breathing shallow but steady. "Help me get him into the wagon," Victoria ordered Carl. "We need to get him back to the house in case Doc Anderson is not in town. At least there I can properly clean and bandage the wound." It took both of them to lift Morrison's unconscious weight into the wagon bed. Victoria climbed in back with him, keeping pressure on the wound during the agonizingly slow journey back to the ranch. She found herself praying, something she had not done much since arriving in Wyoming. "Please let him live. Please let the doctor arrive in time. Please do not make me a widow before I have even had a chance to be a proper wife." Back at the house, they got Morrison into bed. Victoria worked efficiently, cleaning the wound as best she could, wrapping his head in bandages, checking his pupils and pulse like she had seen doctors do. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped entirely. His skin was clammy and cold. Carl hovered anxiously. "Is he going to make it?" "I do not know," Victoria said honestly. "Head wounds are unpredictable. We just have to wait for the doctor and hope for the best." Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Victoria stayed at Morrison's bedside, periodically checking his vital signs, trying to get him to drink a little water during the brief moments when he seemed semi-conscious. Carl, on the other hand, Tom, waited in the kitchen, offering to help but mostly staying out of the way. It was nearly sunset when Victoria heard horses approaching. She ran to the door expecting to see Sam returning with Doc Anderson. Instead, she saw Sam, the doctor, and Brett Jenkins all riding into the yard together. Brett dismounted quickly, his eyes scanning her face with obvious concern. "Sam stopped at my place on his way to town. I came as soon as I heard." "That is kind of you, but unnecessary," Victoria said stiffly, aware of how improper it was for Brett to be here, even under these circumstances. "I came to help however I can. Ranchers look after each other out here." Brett's tone was carefully neutral, appropriate for the audience of listening ears. Doc Anderson pushed past them both, medical bag in hand. "Where is the patient?" Victoria led him to the bedroom and stood back while he examined Morrison. The doctor's face was grave as he cleaned and re-bandaged the wound, checked Morrison's responses, and asked Victoria detailed questions about his condition since the accident. Finally, Doc Anderson stepped back. "He has a severe concussion and possibly a skull fracture. The next 24 hours are critical. He needs to be watched constantly. If he vomits or has seizures or if his breathing changes, call for me immediately. Even if he survives, there may be lasting effects. Brain injuries are unpredictable." Victoria felt her knees go weak. Doc Anderson steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Are you up for this? Do you have someone who can help you watch him through the night?" "I can do it," Victoria said, though truthfully she was exhausted already. "I will stay." Brett's voice came from the doorway. "I can take shifts with Victoria through the night. That way she can rest some." Doc Anderson looked between them and Victoria saw calculation in his eyes. The doctor was no fool, but he simply nodded. "That is sensible. Head injuries require constant monitoring. Having two people makes it much safer for the patient." And so it was decided. The ranch hands left to handle evening chores and bed down in the bunkhouse. Doc Anderson returned to town after giving Victoria detailed instructions. And Victoria found herself alone in the house with her unconscious husband, and the man she had been trying so hard not to think about. For a long moment after the doctor left, they simply stood in the kitchen, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Brett spoke first. "I know this is complicated, but I truly am just here to help. I know." Victoria felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Thank you for coming. I do not think I could manage an entire night alone." "You will not have to." Brett's voice was gentle. "Why do not you sit with him for a few hours while I make some coffee and something for us to eat? Then you can sleep for a bit, and I will watch him." It was the most practical arrangement. Victoria returned to the bedroom while Brett moved quietly around the kitchen. She sat in the chair beside the bed, watching Morrison's chest rise and fall, listening to his labored breathing. This man was her husband. She owed him her loyalty and her care. Whatever she felt for Brett had to be set aside. Brett brought her coffee and a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold meat. "Eat," he ordered gently. "You need to keep your strength up." They worked out a schedule. Victoria would watch Morrison until midnight while Brett slept on the settee, then they would trade places until dawn. It was appropriate and practical, and Victoria told herself there was nothing wrong with the arrangement. But as the hours ticked by and the house grew quiet around her, Victoria found herself hyper-aware of Brett's presence just a room away. She thought about their conversation on the porch, about his hand on her face, about the way he looked at her like she mattered. She thought about the cold efficiency of her marriage to Morrison, and the warm possibility Brett represented. Midnight came. Brett appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep. "Any changes?" "None. His breathing is steady. He has not woken at all." Victoria stood, stretching her stiff muscles. "Go sleep. I will call you if anything changes." Victoria should have gone directly to the spare bedroom she had not slept in since her wedding night. Instead, she found herself hesitating in the doorway. "Brett." "Yes." "Why did you really come tonight?" Brett was silent for a moment, his face partially shadowed in the lamplight. "Because the thought of you dealing with this alone was unbearable. Because even though I know I have no right to care about you, I do anyway. Because being near you, even under these circumstances, is better than not being near you at all." "You should not say such things," Victoria whispered, but she did not move. "I know, but they are true regardless." Brett looked at Morrison's still form. "I am not a home wrecker, Victoria. I would never ask you to leave your husband or break your vows." But I also cannot pretend I do not feel what I feel. If things were different, Victoria began, then stopped. What was the point of hypotheticals? Things were not different. They were exactly as they were. Go rest, Brett said softly. We can think about complicated things tomorrow. Victoria went to the spare room and collapsed onto the narrow bed, emotionally and physically exhausted. But despite her tiredness, sleep was elusive. She lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of Brett moving quietly in the other room, feeling like her heart was being pulled in two different directions at once. Morrison survived the night. By morning, he had regained consciousness briefly, though he was confused and in obvious pain. Doc Anderson returned at dawn to check on him and declared that the worst danger had passed, though full recovery would take weeks or months and might never be complete. Brett left as soon as the doctor arrived, appropriately stepping aside now that the crisis had passed. He met Victoria's eyes briefly before mounting his horse, and the unspoken emotion between them was almost a physical thing. Then he was gone, and Victoria was left alone with her husband and an increasingly complicated tangle of feelings. The following weeks were grueling. Morrison was bedridden and irritable, unable to tolerate light or loud noises, prone to vicious headaches that left him moaning in pain. Victoria nursed him diligently, managing the ranch as best she could with Carl's help, cooking and cleaning and administering medicines. She was exhausted constantly, falling into bed each night too tired even to think. Slowly, Morrison began to improve. He was able to sit up, then to walk short distances, then to venture outside for brief periods. But he was different. The already cold man had become even more withdrawn and bitter. He snapped at Victoria for minor infractions, complained constantly about his lingering headaches and dizziness, and seemed angry at the world for his misfortune. Victoria bore it all with as much grace as she could muster. She reminded herself that he had been through a terrible ordeal, that pain and fear often made people lash out, that this was part of the in-sickness she had vowed to honor. But her own reserves were wearing dangerously thin. It was mid-May when Morrison was finally well enough to resume light ranch duties. Victoria thought perhaps his recovery would improve his mood, but instead, he seemed to sink deeper into bitterness. He criticized her constantly, found fault with everything she did, and began drinking whiskey in the evenings, something he had previously abstained from. One night, after Morrison had drunk more than usual and gone to bed early, Victoria sat alone in the kitchen and allowed herself to cry. She was so tired of trying to please an unpleasable man, tired of walking on eggshells, tired of living a life devoid of kindness or affection, tired of pretending this was enough. She was still crying when she heard a soft knock at the door. Her heart leaped, and she knew who it was before she even opened it. Brett stood on the porch, his hat in his hands. "I saw the lamp still burning. I was riding back from town and thought I would check how Morrison is recovering, but I can see something is wrong. What happened?" "Nothing happened." "Everything happened. I do not know any more." Victoria knew she should send him away, but she was so desperately lonely for a kind word that she stepped aside instead. "Morrison is asleep. Come in, but just for a moment." Brett entered cautiously, his eyes taking in her tear-stained face with obvious distress. "Victoria, you look exhausted. Are you eating, sleeping, when I have time?" Victoria sank into a chair, too tired to maintain pretenses. "Morrison is recovering physically, but something changed in the accident. He is angry all the time now. Nothing I do is good enough. I know I should be patient, that he has been through a trauma, but I just feel so alone and tired. This is not right." Brett crouched in front of her chair so they were at eye level. "You are being worked to exhaustion and treated poorly. No one deserves that. I made a commitment. I have to honor it, even if it destroys you." Brett's hands clenched on his knees, clearly restraining himself from touching her. "There has to be a limit, Victoria. You matter too. Your health and happiness matter." "Do they?" Victoria laughed bitterly. "I am just a mail-order bride, a transaction, a worker in exchange for shelter. That is all I have ever been to him. You are so much more than that." Brett's voice was fierce with conviction. "You are intelligent and strong and brave. You survived leaving everything you knew to come to a strange place. You nearly died in a blizzard and then made the best of a difficult situation. You nursed a man back from the brink of death, even when he did not deserve your care. You are remarkable, Victoria. Do not let Morrison make you believe otherwise." Victoria found fresh tears spilling down her cheeks, but these were different. These were from hearing words she desperately needed to hear, from being seen and valued by someone. "You should not say these things to me." "Why?" "Because you are married. Your vows do not change the truth of who you are." Brett did reach for her then, just covering her hand with his briefly. "I am not asking you to leave him. I know you take your commitment seriously, and that is one of the things I admire about you. But I need you to know that you have worth beyond what Morrison recognizes. I need you to take care of yourself because you matter to me." "Brett," Victoria whispered, turning her hand under his so their palms met. The touch was electric, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with physical desire and everything to do with genuine connection. They stayed like that for a moment that stretched like honey, neither willing to break the contact. Then a sound from the bedroom, Morrison shifting in his sleep, broke the spell. Victoria jerked her hand back and Brett stood quickly. "I should go," he said. "Yes." But Victoria did not want him to leave. She wanted him to stay and keep telling her she mattered, keep looking at her like she was worth something. Brett moved toward the door, then paused. "I am here if you need anything. Anything at all, day or night. My ranch is 5 miles east. I know." "I remember." How could she forget? After he left, Victoria sat for a long time in the quiet kitchen, her hand tingling where Brett had touched it. She knew she was in dangerous territory, that allowing these feelings to grow was playing with fire. But she was so starved for kindness and connection that she could not bring herself to regret those few moments of honest human warmth. The summer progressed with brutal heat and longer days of work. Morrison's physical health continued to improve, but his temperament did not. If anything, he became more controlling and suspicious. He noticed how much time Victoria spent looking toward the eastern boundary of their land. He commented on the fact that she always perked up when Brett's name was mentioned. He made it clear that he did not want Brett on their property for any reason. Victoria tried to comply. She truly did. But in late June, circumstances conspired to throw them together again. Morrison had taken his hands to a neighboring ranch to help with a barn raising, a community effort that would keep them away for 2 days and 1 night. Victoria was alone at the ranch, which should have been a relief, a chance to rest and breathe without constantly monitoring her husband's volatile moods. The first day passed pleasantly enough. Victoria worked at her own pace, even took time to bathe properly and wash her hair, luxuries she rarely had time for. She was hanging laundry in the late afternoon when she heard cattle bellowing in distress from the direction of their herd. She ran toward the sound, her heart pounding. The cattle were spooked, running in circles near a gully. It took Victoria a moment to see what had frightened them. A mountain lion, young but still dangerous, had wandered too close to the herd and become trapped against the rocky embankment. Victoria's mind raced. She was alone and armed only with the small pistol she kept in her apron pocket for snakes. The lion was frightened and therefore unpredictable. The cattle were valuable, Losing several to stampeding or the lion's attack would be a financial disaster. She needed help, but the nearest ranch hand was miles away with Morrison. No, the nearest help was Brett's ranch, 5 miles east. Victoria made the decision quickly. She ran to the barn, saddled the fastest horse, and rode out at full gallop. The ride felt endless, her mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. What if the lion attacked the cattle before she got back? What if she could not find Brett's ranch? What if he was not even home? But she remembered his directions perfectly, and the fork toward the Pine Ridge was clearly marked. She found Brett's ranch just as the sun was beginning to set. It was smaller and less polished than Morrison's, but something about it felt warmer, more alive. Brett was working near the barn and looked up in alarm when he saw her galloping in. "Victoria, what is wrong?" She explained the situation quickly, barely catching her breath between words. Brett did not hesitate. "Stay here, I will handle it." "No, I am coming with you, they are my cattle too." Victoria set her jaw stubbornly. Brett looked like he wanted to argue but recognized the determination in her eyes. "All right, but you follow my lead and stay behind me." They rode back together, arriving as the sun touched the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson. The cattle were still agitated, the young mountain lion still trapped. Brett approached slowly and carefully, rifle ready but clearly not eager to shoot the animal if he could avoid it. "Make some noise," he instructed Victoria. "We want to give the lion an escape route and convince it to take it." They shouted and waved blankets, creating a corridor away from the cattle. The mountain lion, frightened by the commotion, finally saw its chance and bolted, disappearing into the rocks. The cattle gradually calmed and Victoria sagged with relief. "That was smart, coming to get help," Brett said as they worked together to settle the herd. "A lot of people would have tried to handle it alone and gotten hurt." "You taught me that ranchers look after each other," Victoria replied, and was rewarded with one of Brett's rare, genuine smiles. By the time they finished checking that all the cattle were accounted for and uninjured, night had fallen completely. They walked their horses back toward the house, neither seeming in a hurry despite the late hour. "You should stay here tonight," Brett said as they reached the barn. "It is dark, and your horse is tired. You can sleep in my spare room, and I will ride back with you at first light to make sure there are no other issues with the herd." Victoria knew she should refuse. Being alone with Brett overnight, even in separate rooms, was wildly inappropriate. But she was exhausted, and the thought of riding back alone in the dark was daunting. "If you are sure it is not an imposition, it would be an honor." Brett's cabin was indeed smaller than Morrison's house, but it had something Morrison's lacked: personality. Books lined a shelf by the fireplace. A comfortable armchair sat angled to catch the lamplight. Photographs of people who must have been Brett's family hung on the walls. It felt like a home, not just a shelter. Brett made coffee and heated up stew while Victoria sat at his kitchen table, suddenly feeling awkward. They were alone in a way they had never been before, with no emergency to justify Brett's presence, no sleeping husband in the next room. "Tell me about your family," Victoria said, grasping for safe conversation. "The people in the photographs." Brett's face softened. "That is my parents, my 5 older brothers and their families. This was taken right before I left Indiana. My oldest brother runs the family farm now. The others have their own places nearby. My mother wanted me to stay, but there just was not enough land to divide 6 ways and make a living. Coming out here was hard, but it was the right choice. Do you miss them?" "Every day, but we write letters and I am hoping to go visit once my ranch is more established." Brett set a bowl of stew in front of her. "What about you? Any siblings?" "No, I was an only child. Both my parents are gone now, and I have no one back in Boston." Victoria heard the loneliness in her own voice. That made the decision to come west easier, I suppose. There was nothing keeping me there. You have something here now, Brett said quietly. A home, a role, connections to the community. A legal contract, Victoria corrected. That is what my marriage is. Morrison made that clear from the start. Brett was silent for a moment, then spoke carefully. May I ask you something, and will you answer honestly, I suppose? If you could go back to the day you arrived in that blizzard and make a different choice, would you? Victoria's breath caught. It was a dangerous question, one that opened doors better left closed. But she found herself answering honestly. Every day. I regret this choice every single day. Then why stay? Because I made a vow. Because I have nowhere else to go. Because leaving would make me a scandal and a pariah. Because women do not just walk away from marriages, no matter how unhappy. The law gives Morrison every right to his property, and I am his property. Victoria's words came faster, all the frustration and trapped feeling pouring out. You know what would happen if I left? Morrison could have me arrested for abandoning my legal duties. I would have no money, no recourse, no options except prostitution or charity. The legal system, society, God himself according to the church, they all say I made my choice and now I must live with it. That is unjust. That is reality. Victoria pushed her barely touched stew away. I am sorry. I should not burden you with my complaints. It is not a burden. I asked because I care about the answer, because I care about you. Brett reached across the table, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. Victoria looked at his hand, at the calluses and scars from years of hard work. She thought about Morrison's hands, which touched her with cold efficiency. She thought about the vows she had made and the life she was trapped in. She thought about this man who had shown her more kindness in a few encounters than her husband had in months of marriage. Then she placed her hand in Brett's, and something in her chest broke open like spring ice. Victoria, Brett said her name like a prayer. I know I have no right to say this. I know it is wrong and complicated and potentially disastrous, but I have to tell you the truth. I am in love with you. I have been since the day I pulled you out of that blizzard and saw you fighting to survive. I love your strength and your determination. I love the way you keep trying to make the best of an impossible situation. I love your kindness and your intelligence and the way you do not give up even when you have every reason to. I am not asking you to do anything about this. I just needed you to know that you are loved, truly and completely, by at least one person in this world. Tears streamed down Victoria's face. You should not love me. I am married. I am trapped. Loving me will only bring you pain. Too late. I already love you and I do not regret it. Brett's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Whatever happens, however this plays out, I want you to know that you are worthy of love. Morrison's failure to see that is his loss, not your deficit. I love you too. The words burst out of Victoria before she could stop them. I know I should not. I know it is wrong, but I do. I think I have since that first day too, since you kept me warm and safe in the storm. And it is killing me, Brett, because I cannot have you. I cannot leave Morrison even though being with him is slowly destroying me. And I cannot be with you without destroying both our reputations and futures. So what do we do? How do we survive this? Brett stood and moved around the table, pulling Victoria gently to her feet. He cupped her face in both hands, looking into her eyes with such tenderness that her heart ached. We take it one day at a time. We do not make any rash decisions tonight. But Victoria, I want you to hear this. You do not have to suffer forever. Yes, leaving would be hard and complicated, but it is not impossible. Women do leave unhappy marriages. They survive and build new lives. I am not saying you should do that, but I am saying the option exists. You are not as powerless as you feel. Morrison would never let me go. And even if I did leave, we still could not be together. A divorced woman and the man she left her husband for would be completely ostracized. Then we would go somewhere else. Start over where nobody knows our history. Brett smiled sadly. I am getting ahead of myself. I am not trying to pressure you into anything. I just want you to know that if you decide you cannot live with Morrison anymore, you have options. You have someone who will help you, who will stand by you no matter what. Victoria closed her eyes, allowing herself just for a moment to imagine it. A life with Brett, in a place where they could be together without shame. Waking up beside someone who looked at her with love instead of cold appraisal. Building a genuine partnership based on respect and affection. It seemed like an impossible dream, too good to ever be real. I should go to bed, she whispered, before we do something we cannot take back. You are right. But Brett did not step away immediately. For a long moment they stood in the lamplight, hands clasped, faces inches apart. Victoria could feel his breath on her skin, see the gold flecks in his eyes. It would take nothing to close that distance, to finally know what it felt like to be kissed by someone who loved her, but she did not. She stepped back, breaking the spell. Thank you for dinner, and for helping with the mountain lion, and for everything. Always, Brett said simply. He showed her to the spare room, a small space that was clearly where his ranch hands sometimes stayed when weather made it impractical to go to the bunkhouse. It was clean and simple, and Victoria lay on the narrow bed thinking that even this basic room felt more welcoming than her bedroom at Morrison's ranch. She barely slept, her mind spinning with Brett's words. He loved her. She loved him. But love alone could not overcome the massive obstacles between them. Could she really leave her marriage? Could she live with the scandal and social condemnation? More pressingly, could she live with staying, knowing now what she was missing, knowing that love and partnership and respect existed but not for her? Morning came too soon. Brett cooked breakfast and they ate in an awkwardness that had not existed the night before. Too much had been said. Too much had been revealed. They both knew the impossible situation they were in, and neither had solutions. They rode back to Morrison's ranch in near silence. Brett insisted on checking the entire herd, making sure no cattle were injured or ill. Everything was fine. The mountain lion had not returned. The ranch looked exactly as Victoria had left it, evidence of Morrison's absence and her brief escape. He returns tomorrow, Brett asked as they stood in the yard. Late afternoon, most likely. Will you tell him I was here? Victoria considered lying but knew that ranch gossip being what it was, Morrison would likely hear about Brett's presence anyway. I will tell him there was a mountain lion threatening the cattle and I rode to your ranch for help. It is the truth. He will not like it. No. But it was the right thing to do and I will not apologize for protecting our herd. Victoria straightened her spine. Thank you again, Brett, for everything. Victoria, Brett caught her hand one last time. Remember what I said. You have options. You have someone who will help you if you need it. Do not forget that. I will not forget. How could she when his words had opened up possibilities she had not allowed herself to consider before? After Brett left, Victoria spent the day working and thinking. She went over every angle, every possibility. She thought about what leaving would mean, what staying would mean, what kind of life she wanted for herself. The conclusions she reached both terrified and exhilarated her. Morrison returned the next day in his usual dour mood, made worse when Victoria told him about the mountain lion and Brett's assistance. As predicted, he was furious. I told you to stay away from Jenkins. Morrison's voice was dangerously quiet. There was a mountain lion threatening our cattle. I did what any reasonable person would do and got help from the nearest neighbor, Victoria replied calmly. Would you prefer I let the lion kill valuable stock because of your personal grudges? Watch your tone, wife. I will not have you speaking to me with disrespect in my own home. This is my home too. I work here, live here, contribute here. That gives me the right to have opinions and make decisions when you are not present. Morrison's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist hard enough to leave bruises. You have the rights I give you and no more. Everything here is mine, including you. The sooner you remember that, the better off we will both be. Victoria wrenched her arm free, her heart pounding. Do not grab me like that again. Or what? You will leave. Morrison's laugh was ugly. You have nowhere to go, Victoria. You are stuck here. Stuck with me. You can make the best of it, or you can be miserable, but either way, you are not leaving. He stormed off to the barn, leaving Victoria shaking with anger and fear. She looked at the bruises already forming on her wrist and made her decision. Morrison was right about one thing. She could not keep living like this. But he was wrong about her being completely without options. That night, after Morrison had drunk himself to sleep, Victoria packed a small bag with essentials. She took only what was hers. The clothes she had brought from Boston, her mother's locket, the few dollars she had secretly saved from egg money. She wrote a brief letter explaining that she was leaving, that she could not stay in a marriage devoid of respect or kindness, that she released Morrison from any obligation to her and asked the same in return. She left at dawn, before Morrison woke. The ride to Brett's ranch felt like the longest and shortest of her life. Every moment, she expected to hear Morrison pursuing her. Every moment, she questioned whether she was making a terrible mistake. But she kept riding, because the alternative was going back to slow destruction. Brett was feeding his horses when she arrived. He took one look at her face, her packed bag, the bruises on her wrist that she had not thought to cover, and his jaw tightened. Tell me what happened. Victoria told him everything. Morrison's anger, his violence, his cruel words. Brett listened with barely controlled rage, his fists clenching and unclenching. When she finished, he said simply, "You are safe now. You are staying here and Morrison will not lay another hand on you. Brett, the scandal, this will destroy both our reputations. Morrison could charge you with harboring his runaway wife. He could demand I be returned to him. The law is entirely on his side." Victoria felt tears threatening again. Maybe I should go to town instead, stay with the Andersons until I can figure out what to do. You are staying here where I can protect you. As for Morrison, let him come. Let him try to take you back by force and see what happens. Brett's expression was fierce. I meant what I said, Victoria. I will stand by you. Whatever comes, we face it together. Over the next days, the storm Victoria had anticipated broke with full force. Morrison did indeed come to Brett's ranch, accompanied by the sheriff, and demanding his wife be returned to him. Victoria stood her ground, showing the sheriff her bruises and explaining that she had left a dangerous situation. The sheriff, a practical man named Bill Thompson, looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Madam, legally speaking, Morrison is within his rights to insist you return home," Sheriff Thompson said. "You are his wife, but I am not in the habit of forcing women into dangerous situations either." "Then we are at an impasse," Brett said quietly. "Because Victoria is not going anywhere she does not want to go." Morrison's face was mottled with rage. "She is my wife, my legal property. You cannot just steal her." "I did not steal anyone." Victoria made her own choice to leave an intolerable situation, Brett replied calmly, though Victoria could see the tension in his shoulders. The standoff continued for tense minutes. Finally, Sheriff Thompson made a suggestion. "Why do not we let the circuit judge sort this out when he comes through next month? In the meantime, Mrs. Morrison can stay in town under the Andersons' care. That way, she is safe but not living with Jenkins, which might calm some of the gossip." It was a compromise that satisfied no one, but that everyone could live with. Victoria moved into the Andersons' spare room, the same one she had stayed in the night of the blizzard that now felt like a lifetime ago. Mrs. Anderson was sympathetic and protective, making it clear that Victoria was under her household's protection. The town buzzed with scandal. Some people thought Victoria was a shameful example of modern women's disrespect for sacred vows. Others thought Morrison had it coming for treating a wife so poorly. Most just enjoyed having something interesting to talk about. Brett visited Victoria daily, always properly, always with Mrs. Anderson present as chaperone. They talked about the future, made plans for various contingencies, and found comfort in each other's presence. The judge's arrival seemed both too soon and too far away. When Circuit Judge Samuel Hendricks finally arrived in Leavenworth in late July, the courtroom was packed with curious townspeople. Morrison sat with his lawyer, confident in the law's protection of husbands' rights. Victoria sat with Brett beside her and Mrs. Anderson for moral support, terrified but determined. The judge listened to both sides. Morrison's lawyer arguing that Victoria had abandoned her legal duties without cause. Victoria's testimony about the emotional coldness and eventual violence of her marriage. Doc Anderson testified about the bruises he had treated. Brett testified about Morrison's controlling behavior and the obvious unhappiness he had witnessed. Judge Hendricks was an older man with sharp eyes who had clearly presided over many difficult cases. After hearing all the testimony, he was silent for a long moment, then spoke. "This is a complicated situation. Legally, Mr. Morrison's rights as a husband are clear. Socially and morally, the situation is murkier. However, I have seen the evidence of violence and I find Mrs. Morrison's fear for her safety to be credible. Therefore, I am granting a legal separation, allowing Mrs. Morrison to live apart from her husband. Assets will remain with Mr. Morrison, as is legally proper. Mrs. Morrison, you will need to find employment and housing appropriate for a separated woman. And Mr. Jenkins," the judge's gaze turned stern, "I suggest you keep your distance from Mrs. Morrison for at least a year to avoid charges of adultery, which could still be brought against both of you." It was not perfect, but it was more than Victoria had dared hope for. She was legally allowed to leave Morrison. Yes, she was penniless and her reputation damaged, but she was free. The next months were difficult. Victoria found work as a seamstress, sharing a small room with another working woman above the general store. It was humble and sometimes humiliating after being mistress of a ranch, but it was hers. She earned her own money and made her own decisions. Brett kept his distance as ordered, but they exchanged letters constantly. He wrote about his ranch, his hopes and dreams, his conviction that time would eventually allow them to be together properly. Victoria wrote about her work, her slow rebuilding of a life, her gratitude for his patience. Morrison did not make things easy. He contested the separation, tried to claim Victoria was squandering money that rightfully belonged to him, spread rumors about her character. But gradually, his efforts lost steam. The town had largely decided Victoria had done nothing wrong, and Morrison's isolation increased. The year passed slowly, but it passed. Victoria built a modest but respectable life for herself. She made friends among the working women of Leavenworth. She proved she could survive independently. And every day, she thought about Brett and the future they might have. When the year was finally up, in August 1883, Brett appeared at Victoria's door with a proper bouquet of wildflowers. "I have waited as long as the law required. Victoria Chambers, knowing that being with me will always carry some scandal, knowing that starting over will be hard, would you do me the honor of marrying me?" "Yes," Victoria said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They married a week later in a simple ceremony with just the Andersons and a few friends present. Morrison tried to contest it, claiming Victoria's separation was not equivalent to a divorce, but the judge ruled that the separation had effectively ended the marriage and Victoria was free to remarry. Victoria moved to Brett's ranch as his wife, and for the first time since arriving in Wyoming territory, she felt like she was truly coming home. The ranch was small and the work hard, but they built it together. Brett consulted her on decisions, valued her opinions, treated her as a true partner. More than that, he loved her. He showed it in countless ways. The way he looked at her across the breakfast table, the way he held her at night like she was precious, the way he listened when she talked, the way he made her laugh. Victoria had not known marriage could be like this, full of respect and affection and genuine partnership. They faced challenges. Some people in town never fully forgave the scandal. Morrison remained a difficult neighbor until he eventually sold his ranch and moved back east. Money was sometimes tight as they built the ranch, but they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. In the spring of 1884, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. The joy on Brett's face when she told him brought tears to her eyes. He was going to be such a good father, so different from the cold efficiency she would have experienced with Morrison. Their son was born in December 1884, during the first major snowstorm of winter. Doc Anderson delivered him while Brett paced anxiously. They named him Thomas Henry Jenkins, and he was perfect. Healthy lungs, bright eyes, and from the very first moment, deeply loved. Victoria held her son and thought about that day she had arrived in Leavenworth during a blizzard, cold and scared and heading toward what she thought was her only option. If someone had told her then that within 3 years she would be holding her baby in a house full of love, married to a man who cherished her, she never would have believed it. But life had a way of surprising you. The path had been harder than she ever imagined, requiring courage she did not know she possessed. But it had led her here, to this moment, to this life that was truly hers. Brett came into the bedroom, his face soft with wonder as he looked at Victoria and their son. "How are my 2 favorite people?" "Perfect," Victoria said and meant it. "We are absolutely perfect." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, one arm around Victoria's shoulders, the other reaching to gently touch Thomas's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around Brett's with surprising strength. "He is going to be strong like his mother," Brett said, pressing a kiss to Victoria's temple. "And kind like his father," Victoria replied, leaning into his warmth. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the ranch in white, but inside, the fire burned bright and warm. Victoria thought about that first blizzard, how Brett had kept her safe and warm, and how, in a way, he had never let her go. He had been her anchor through all the storms that followed, and now they had built something beautiful together. 2 years later, in the summer of 1886, their daughter was born. They named her Margaret Rose, and she had Victoria's dark hair and Brett's striking eyes. Thomas was a doting big brother, carefully watching over his baby sister with a protectiveness that made both parents smile. The ranch prospered. With Victoria's good management and Brett's hard work, they expanded their herd and eventually bought additional land. Victoria kept the books, managed the household budget, and proved to have a talent for raising chickens, which became a profitable side business. Brett's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher grew, bringing them respect from neighboring homesteads. By 1890, Brett and Victoria had built something remarkable. Their ranch was one of the most successful in the area. They had 4 children now, Thomas, Margaret, and twin boys born in 1888, James and William. The house had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family. They employed several ranch hands and were known for treating their workers fairly and paying on time. But more than the material success, they had built a family rooted in love and respect. Their children grew up watching their parents work together as true partners, seeing affection and kindness modeled daily. Victoria made sure to teach her children that marriage should be a choice made with care, that no one should settle for less than they deserved. Sometimes, when Victoria had a moment to herself, she would stand on the porch and look out at the vast Wyoming landscape, still awed by its harsh beauty. She thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off that train into a blizzard, desperate and alone. She thought about the choices that had led her here, some good and some that seemed terrible at the time but ultimately led her to where she needed to be. Morrison's name occasionally came up in town gossip. He had remarried back east, to a woman described as meek and obedient, exactly what he thought he wanted. Victoria felt pity for this unknown woman, hoped she was being treated better than Victoria had been, but mostly did not think about her first marriage at all. That part of her life felt like it had happened to someone else. Brett would join her on the porch during these moments of reflection, sliding an arm around her waist and pulling her close. Sometimes they talked. Often they simply stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains, listening to their children's laughter from inside the house. "Happy?" Brett would ask, though he could clearly see the answer in her face. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Victoria would reply, and it was always true. The years continued to pass, bringing the joys and challenges all families face. There were harsh winters and good summers, lean times and prosperous ones, illnesses that frightened and recoveries that brought relief. Victoria and Brett weathered it all together, their bond deepening with each shared experience. Thomas grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch and planned to expand it someday. Margaret had her mother's determination and her father's kind heart, along with a talent for healing that made Doc Anderson talk about sponsoring her education back east to become a nurse. The twins were adventurous and constantly in motion, keeping their parents on their toes. In the spring of 1895, Victoria realized she was pregnant again at 35, a surprise that delighted and terrified her in equal measure. Their fifth child, a daughter they named Sarah Ann, was born in November. The older children adored their baby sister, and Victoria marveled at how her life had turned out. She had come to Wyoming territory with nothing, running from debt and limited options, agreeing to marry a stranger because she saw no other choice. That decision had led to hardship and heartbreak, but also to Brett, and to this life they had built together. "You ever regret it?" Victoria asked Brett one night as they sat by the fire after the children were all in bed. "The scandal, the difficulty of those first years. Do you ever wish you had just sent for your own mail-order bride instead of falling in love with someone else's?" Brett was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I regret that you had to suffer with Morrison. I regret that we could not be together sooner. But I do not regret loving you, not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Victoria. You and our children, this life we have built, it is everything I ever wanted and more than I thought I deserved." "You deserve everything good in the world," Victoria said fiercely. "You saved my life that first day in the blizzard, but you kept saving it every day after. You showed me what love and partnership really mean. You gave me a reason to find the courage to leave an intolerable situation. I would not be who I am without you." "We saved each other," Brett replied, pulling her close. "That is what love does, I think. It makes us brave enough to face things we never could alone." The years turned into decades. Brett and Victoria grew old together, watching their children become adults, start families of their own, and build lives that made them proud. The ranch passed to Thomas, who ran it with the same integrity his parents had modeled. Margaret did become a nurse, working in Leavenworth and tending to the sick with compassion. The twins ended up running a successful horse breeding operation on adjoining land. Sarah followed in her father's footsteps, marrying a young rancher and starting her own homestead. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house that Brett and Victoria had built together. As Victoria looked around at all these lives, this family that existed because she had stepped off a train into a blizzard and a stranger had kept her warm and safe, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Brett found her standing alone on the porch where they had stood so many times over the years, looking out at the land they loved. His hair was white now, his face deeply lined from decades of sun and wind, but his eyes were still the same blue-gray that had captivated her that first day. "Thinking deep thoughts?" he asked, taking her hand. "Thinking about how none of this would exist if not for that blizzard. If you had not been in town that day, if you had not helped me, if you had not fallen in love with me despite every reason not to." Victoria squeezed his hand. "Everything I have, everything I am, it all started that day. The day I saw you fighting to survive in that storm, refusing to give up even when you were freezing and alone, I knew you were extraordinary," Brett said. "Falling in love with you was the easiest thing I ever did. Everything that came after that was harder, but it was worth it. You were always worth it." Inside, someone started playing the piano and children's laughter rang through the house. The sun was setting, painting the Wyoming sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Brett pulled Victoria into his arms, and they swayed together to the distant music, still dancing after all these years. Victoria rested her head on Brett's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She thought about the girl she had been, desperate and scared, agreeing to marry a stranger because she saw no other option. She thought about the woman she had become, strong and confident, surrounded by love and family. The journey between those two people had been difficult and painful, requiring more courage than she knew she possessed. But she had survived. She had found real love with a man who valued her as a true partner. She had built a life of meaning and purpose. And she had learned that sometimes the worst storms lead you exactly where you need to be, if you are brave enough to keep walking through them. Brett had kept her warm that first night, pulling her out of the blizzard and saving her life. But in all the years since, he had kept her warm in countless other ways, with his love, his respect, his unwavering support. He had seen who she truly was and loved her not despite her flaws but including them. He had never let her go, not really, from that very first moment. And Victoria had held onto him just as tightly, through scandals and hardships, through the building of a ranch and a family, through all the moments that make up a life. They had faced everything together, and that had made all the difference. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, Brett and Victoria stood together on the porch of the house they had built, surrounded by the family they had created, living the life they had fought so hard for. The blizzard that brought them together was decades in the past, but its effects rippled forward through time, touching everyone gathered in that house. "Thank you," Victoria whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Brett asked. "For keeping me warm, for never letting me go, for loving me enough to fight for us." Victoria looked up at him, this man who had been her salvation and her partner, her best friend and her great love. "For giving me this beautiful life." Brett smiled, the expression lighting his weathered face. It was my privilege, every single day. They stood together as the night deepened around them, the way they had stood through thousands of nights before, and would stand through whatever nights remained to them. The blizzard was long over, but its gift remained. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting from that chance meeting. Inside, the celebration continued. Outside, Brett and Victoria held each other under the Wyoming stars, grateful for storms survived and love found, for courage discovered and lives well lived. The cold of that January blizzard in 1882 had been transformed over the decades into the enduring warmth of a love that would last their entire lives. And in the end, that was the greatest gift of all, not just surviving the storm, but finding someone to share the warmth with, someone who would never let you go, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Victoria had found that in Brett Jenkins, and he had found it in her. And together, they had created something beautiful that would endure long after they were gone, living on in their children and grandchildren, a legacy of love built from the ashes of a desperate beginning. The story that started with a frightened young woman stepping into a blizzard ended with an old woman surrounded by love, looking back on a life rich with meaning and purpose. It was not the life Victoria had planned or expected, but it was better than anything she could have imagined. And it had all started with a cowboy who kept her warm and never let her go.